Hey everyone. It's time for a props from the past.
At home.
With a special guest, Willow. She's always got something to add. Willow, do you want to tell the fine people at home which video we're going to go over today?
No, she doesn't. She wants her chin scratched.
Oh, goodness. So, this is a really fun one from about 4 years ago. And it's it's really fun that we're doing it right now. Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Yep.
Go be free.
Oh, it's lunchtime.
Go. All right, so you'll hear the sound of cat food munching during this one.
So I made a giant space rifle out of mostly foam for our friends over at Film Riot. And they just posted their 1000th episode today. They started in 2009. They've been going ever since. I've been watching them since back then. And somewhere along the lines, I made friends with them, I think through Brian Brushwood, and I've done a bunch of different projects with them, including this one for a short film they did. I don't remember the name of the short film. Anyway, we'll link to it down below so you can go check it out. But this is the video I made covering how I built the rifle. Let's do this.
When our pals at Film Riot needed a space gun built for an upcoming short film, they knew exactly who to call. Follow along as I show you how I made this foam masterpiece.
Look at this footage. How'd you do that panning shot? Did you use a little egg timer thing?
You must have recorded it.
I don't remember.
Yeah, you must have been recording.
I'm like Gandalf in the Mines of Moria. I have no memory of this place.
Hey there, fellow maker. Welcome down to the shop. Bill here, and today I'm going to show you how I...
Real quick editing note. I don't know what I did with the audio. It sounds like I'm talking into a coffee can.
I can hear a hum, too.
Yeah.
Built this giant foam space gun for our pals over at Film Riot. A few months ago, Ryan gave me a call. He said they needed a gun for their new short film, and it needed to be taken apart. Think like a sniper with a briefcase, opening it up and assembling all the pieces together.
So that was the brief. Ryan was like, I need a biggish gun that's taken apart and a briefcase so that when our actor gets it, he'll open this case and assemble it like a sniper. That's basically all I got. Other than that, he just said, make a cool looking rifle. So I got to play with this a lot, which was super, super fun.
That was really all he gave me, so I had a lot of free reign to design whatever I wanted. Of course, I went with my favorite EVA foam, plus some PVC pipes to put the whole thing together. Of course, the Film Riot short film is out now. You can go watch that right there or down in the description.
There we go.
And check out the super awesome action that Ryan and the team put together.
It looks great when they put like color grading and everything on top of it. Looks really, really nice.
As for the space gun build, well, follow along. I'll show you how I did it.
I used another one of my prop guns to get a rough idea on the scale and traced out a simple shape to start out my design on some craft paper.
A lot of times when I'm trying to scale stuff in general, I'll just grab a thing that I already own that I know is like the right size for me. And then I'll design everything around the basic dimensions, like where the handle goes, where the foregrip goes, that sort of stuff.
PVC pipes and fittings were used as a skeleton, so I lined up those fittings to figure out where everything would need to go. Then I cut the pipes to length to make the body and handles of the gun. The handle was bent back a little bit using a heat gun. I did the same thing for...
if you want to bend a PVC pipe more than that, but you don't want it to collapse, you can cast a tube of silicone, not a tube, a cylinder of silicone with a string through it. Martin from Wintergotten does this a lot.
Yeah, because he has to bend a lot of pipes.
So basically you put this silicone plug, this silicone snake, into a tube. It fills the inside of it. You can heat it and then bend it and it won't collapse. And then the flexible silicone can just be pulled out the other side.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Or heated sand.
Oh yeah. Oh, we've done that.
Yeah.
For where the ammo can would connect with the top of the gun.
And this part
when
I
I was
didn't care
happy
if it
with
collapsed.
the placement, I glued all of these parts together using some PVC cement. The gun stock needed to collapse, so I repurposed an old tripod leg.
Yeah.
This would allow for the stock to...
I got this idea from our buddy David Carpenter from Evil Effects. He did this on a Destiny rifle before Destiny came out. And he had it at Dragon Con to show everyone. And he did exactly this with the telescoping stock from a tripod.
That's
And
super
I put that in my back pocket, hung on to it for like 3 or 4 years, and then I was like, yes, totally using this. That's the first tripod I've ever bought, by the way, for filming. And it's not a good tripod.
Yeah, we didn't use it anymore, which is, I mean, like, I don't know if you kept the rest of it, but
I think I just threw it away in the move.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Lock in both a compressed and extended position. A slot was cut into the leg, and I attached a screw. This was added so that the tripod leg would be limited in how far it could travel. Then,
There
with
you
a
go.
hammer and chisel, I delicately removed some of the PVC pipe
Delicately?
to create a spot to secure the tripod leg. The tripod was glued into place permanently with hot glue. To start bulking out the body of the gun, I cut out some strips
It's
of
so much
floor
fun
mats
you got
and
to
began
design your
hot gluing
own.
them
It
to
was
the
so
PVC
much
pipe
fun.
'Cause you can
frame.
design
These
it around
pieces
the
were
form, the
shaped
functional
on my
form.
various
Exactly,
cutting
yeah.
and sanding tools to get them
And
to
no one
slot
will know that
perfectly
you changed
into
the
place.
design.
The PVC
Nope.
was sanded and the foam was hot glued down to its final spot. I repeated this in several layers until the frame was totally covered and the gun body was the shape that I was looking for.
Yeah, basically, like, a lot of the internal stuff can be ugly. It doesn't really matter so long as it stays together. And then once you have it all together and your function works, then you can go, all right, what details do we add to this to make it a little bit prettier, to make it tell more of a story?
Some modification was needed to make sure that all the parts fit together, kind of like the ammo can. To make
we
the
go.
gun barrel, I started by wrapping a PVC pipe with some 10mm thick EVA foam. This was glued together using barge contact cement. I trimmed the bottom flat on the bandsaw, and then I glued on a
Probably
beveled
where the
strip
seam
of
was,
foam.
yep.
Yep. That, I can tell you, if you're doing foam work, you don't have a bandsaw yet, some good stuff in this video for you.
Seam and
It'll
add a
convince
nice little
ya.
bit of detail. The end of the barrel was then beveled, and I glued on a strip of foam to clean it up a little bit. More strips of foam were glued to the sides of the barrel to add even more detail. One of these strips was decorated
These
with
are
some
nice
small
floor
pieces
mats.
of beveled
Yeah,
foam.
they are.
I cut these tiny pieces out on the bandsaw, and then I super glued them down into place using another choke of foam as a spacer. Once that rail piece was done, it could be glued down to the barrel.
See that? The thing I don't point out in this video is how quickly I was able to put that detailed thing together because of said bandsaw.
Similar to the barrel, I glued on a 10mm piece of foam around the foregrip. I capped it off with another hunk of foam. The rear grip, however, was done in a different way. I started making the front and rear profiles of the grip from strips of foam. Once I glued those down,
that.
the gaps
Yeah.
behind them were backfilled with a little bit of hot glue to keep them from compressing too much. Then I glued down some other sheets of foam on top of it on either side to close off the handle area.
So this is basically like sculpting, and what I love is being able to like put together like the primitive shapes, primitive forms, to get it kind of close to what I want, and then all I have to do is round the corners and stuff to sculpt it into more like what who's hissing? To sculpt it more like what it's supposed to eventually look like. I think I work better that way than like if I'm sculpting something out of clay, to start with just like a block of clay. I like getting those basic forms down first, and
that's the way we
Then
would
whittling
do
it away.
3D modeling.
Exactly, yeah.
It's really, you just keep adding facets and keep smoothing it as you go.
The oversized foam was trimmed down with a knife to more closely match the handle profile. The rest of the handle forming was done over on the rotary
There
tool
we go.
using a sanding bit. Jumping back to the stock, I drilled out some holes in the tripod leg so that I could screw in a good platform for the rest of the piece. That platform was another piece of foam that was screwed and glued to the metal leg. Then I glued
that kind of, let's call it engineering, that kind of engineering problem solving. Oh, I love it. It's really, really fun for me to figure that stuff out.
This was from 4 years ago?
Yeah.
At this point, you definitely had your style down of like, have a bunch of B-roll and then write a script and read it and then put the B-roll over that. Like, this is all flowing really well.
Yeah.
And it can be a lot tighter than like the way we film now, which is more in the moment stuff. We like doing that, just the videos tend to be longer.
Oh, yeah.
additional pieces of foam to that screwed in piece, creating a strong bond between the foam and the metal. A detail rail piece was made by beveling a piece of foam and then cutting V grooves every inch or so down the length.
Looks
This piece
great.
was then glued around the length of the stock.
That right there is one of the reasons why I love foam so much. You can just bend it around corners like that.
The long part of the stock was reinforced with a thin piece of aluminum, which was hot glued into a recess that was dremeled into the back. The area on the gun that this piece would slide over was detailed using a sharpened metal tube and an X-Acto knife to score the surface. By using a heat gun on these cuts, the foam opened up to create some nice recessed detail. Next, the long stock piece was glued onto the rear stock piece.
Look at
After that,
Yeah,
I started
so it's
adding
just
more and more
free-floating.
detail to the surface of the gun. For example, more foam parts were cut out and glued down to obscure the functional PVC pipes. Grooves were scored and then heat gunned into the grips. All of the edges were given a nice bevel with the sanding drum on my rotary tool and cleaned up using a sanding stick. More strips of thin foam were glued down to cover any unsightly seams.
That's another huge bonus when you're making something with from your own design. If there's a seam that you weren't able to like clean up real nice, like just cover it like that. It's intentional.
Yeah.
I meant for it to look
Very
like
nice
that.
looking panel.
Additional pieces of foam were glued down to add more visual interest to the otherwise bland areas of the gun. Circular holes were cut into the surface of the gun to make room for castings that I had of large hex bolt heads.
That makes it
These were
look
super glued
sci-fi.
into interesting parts of the gun.
Hex bolts
Additionally, smaller hex
sci-fi.
set screws were added in a similar manner.
Set
And then the
screws.
trigger guard was made
I bought 2 of those set screw kits from Harbor Freight like 8 years ago. I still have so many left.
from, you guessed it, more foam. I wanted to make the scope hollow so that it could be seen through. So I glued together some sheets of foam into a bit of an A-frame. I glued in a bottom to the scope and then I cut it to length, matching the angles on the front and rear of the scope. To make the scope removable, I started by making a rigid hook out of some styrene plastic
I bet I
on
used
the
magnets.
bandsaw. The mating surface for this hook was also made from a thin sheet of styrene. I started it out by drilling a magnet hole on the drill
Magnets.
press. A magnet was then glued into that piece, which in turn was positioned on the body of the gun, so I could figure out where to make some
Looks
space
like you stole
for the
that magnet
hook
from like
in the
a
foam.
hard drive.
The hook
Yeah.
piece was then sandwiched between several layers.
So a lot of times when we're making stuff out of foam, if there's a part that has a kind of a mechanical connection, that part will make out of plastic or metal.
Something you don't want to flex.
Exactly, yeah. You could, though, instead of using like this plastic, just put a bunch more magnets in that scope and it'll just slap right on there and it should stay no problem. I like having a mechanical connection and a magnet when I'm making these sorts of things. Someone was going to be running around filming with this and I didn't want it popping up.
Yeah, in the field,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
sprinting and any kind of shear force for magnets, it would just, if it's hit from the side, it'll just
Slide right off.
go
Yeah.
whoop
So the
and be
mechanical
gone.
connection helps as well.
Yeah.
Layers of foam.
And it's also cool to like slide it in. It's like click, click, click. It doesn't make those noises. They add them in post though, which is really great.
Magnet was then glued into place to match up with the magnet on the gun body. Once I was happy with the fit, I glued this connector piece to the scope, providing a good positive lock for the scope so that it could be easily
Yeah, it's really
removed.
satisfying.
All that was left to
Yeah,
add some
you
details to the
feel it.
scope. So I cut in some V grooves into the surface. I also knurled a little circle of foam on the bandsaw to make a little knob. That knob was then, of course, hot glued into place. And last,
yeah.
some detail holes were drilled into the side of the scope with a rotary tool. Off camera, I made a trigger out of some scrap PVC plastic. I drilled in a hole into the top of the trigger and hot glued in a spring to give it some action.
yeah.
Then I cut a hole in the body of the gun to make room for the trigger. And
I also have very little memory of this, by the way.
You made it in like a week.
I know, we did this in record time.
Yeah.
It's a lot longer than I spent on the ankle cuffs for proximity. I did those in a day.
I drilled a hole into the PVC pipe frame to accept the trigger
Look at that.
spring.
Mhm.
The final piece was the ammo can, which started its life as a cardboard tube. It was cut to length and then end cap circles were cut out on my laser cutter. These were glued together and around.
It's funny that tracing and cutting those circles with a knife probably would. Ender just finished his lunch and he thinks he's burying it in the wall. This happens a lot. We gonna get one more? All done, buddy? All done.
All done.
Okay. What on earth was I talking about?
The cylinder ammo case. I don't remember what you're talking
I
about.
don't
Found
remember.
the PVC pipe coupler to fit it on the gun. Once I was happy with the
I cut those circles out with a laser. It probably would have been much quicker to cut it out by hand. But once you have a laser cutter, you don't cut circles out by hand anymore. It's so good at it.
fit, the foam insert was then secured into the tube.
Yeah.
Another cap was made for the other side.
Yeah, and you
glued
did
into
like
place.
6 of them.
These
so-
foam caps were then cleaned up and beveled over on the belt sander. For the surface detail around
More
the ammo
lasers.
can, I went back to my trusty laser cutter and zapped my design into a piece of 2mm foam. Some of the cutout parts were then removed
Did
and
you
glued back
design
down
that by like wrapping tape around the tube, or I guess you just measured like the
Probably,
circumference
yeah,
of
yeah.
it, and then you're just like, I have that much room to work with.
create a little bit of relief in the surface. To
Nice.
secure this to the can, I brushed both sides with contact cement. I let it dry for about 5 minutes, and then I wrapped the thin foam piece around the can. After that, I glued down some thin strips of foam to hide any seams and add
right.
a little bit
Yep,
more
just
interesting
cover the
detail.
seam.
The remaining pieces
Totally
were
intentional.
kit bashed from my hoard of resin cast greebles. A handful of pieces were picked out and glued
Perfect.
onto the can to finish it all up. And that was the last bit of fabrication.
That's
On
so
the
cool.
gun, all of the
Yeah,
parts were
I
built,
still really
and it was
like that.
time for paint. All of the gun parts were sealed with black Plasti-Dip. This sealed up the surface and acted like a primer for the subsequent layers of paint. For a base metallic finish, I used
my old
an old airbrush
airbrush.
with low air pressure to spatter some silver acrylic
Yeah.
paint onto the surface. This didn't completely cover the black, but it did create a neat metallic finish.
Ooh.
All of the gun parts got this initial treatment. Then to add a little bit of warmth, I did the same thing with some rusty bronze colored acrylic paint. This created a really interesting
paint chip
and
all over
contrasting
this.
finish. The next layer was a spattering
Spoilers.
of gunmetal acrylic paint to darken things up just a little bit. I was trying to make it look like some kind of weird futuristic metal thing. To seal this base color of coat, I brushed on some gloss
nice.
varnish and then let it dry. The remaining layers of color were going to be
Oh, there's
sprayed
Ken.
on, so I masked off any areas that I wanted to remain my base metal color. To do some paint chipping,
Ah, yes.
I sprayed
Fun story. That can right there, I ordered a can on Amazon and I got a case.
So we have like 6.
So if anyone needs hairspray.
on a layer of hairspray. This was done right before spraying on the next color. I went with a light gray that I mixed up from some white and black acrylic paints. I sprayed on a couple of layers using my airbrush, covering every surface. Once that was dry, I could remove the masking
Oh,
tape to
it's
see
so
the lovely
satisfying.
metallic details showing through. Since I had that layer of hairspray, I could then weather the edges of
Yes.
the piece with a brush and some
All right.
water.
So this is some of the first time I think I've done hairspray chipping, certainly on something this big. It's really fun though. If it's something you haven't tried yet and you have a project you think might work for it, give it a shot. It's totally like there's a knack to it.
Yeah, it's easy to go too far.
Yeah.
But it's a great way to get the fine scratching. Like that, it's hard to get that when you're like putting on latex or
Exactly,
mustard
yeah,
or
yeah.
toothpaste. You get big globby bits. Now you have to clear coat it afterwards, right? Like
Before. So I
Before?
laid down
Okay.
the metallic
Yeah,
and then I clear coated it with varnish.
uh-huh.
And then I sprayed the hairspray.
And then you do the paint.
And then I did the top coat of paint. Yeah.
And
then water and a brush to scrub away wherever you want the top
then what
coat to
stops
melt
the
away.
rest from coming off? Like if someone gets it wet.
Yeah, you probably would just clear coat over the top of it.
Yeah,
yeah.
That I was gonna say that would be the downside for having everything have the same sheen,
Mhm.
because your metal and stuff would all get clear coated.
Now, I will say that after a certain amount of time, the outer layer of paint should dry enough that water isn't going to affect it.
Mhm.
But I don't know how long that might be. It's probably a good idea to clear coat over your paint chipping. If the prop you're using is going to see a lot of wear and tear, and especially if it's going to get wet.
Mhm.
That sounds right.
I gently brushed away any spots that would be worn away until
You can also
the
use a
metal paint
toothpick
showed through.
Yeah. To,
like,
This was,
create
of
little
course, repeated
scratches.
over the entire gun. For
That's
some more
cool,
visual
though.
interest, I made my own little decal stencils from masking tape. These were placed on the surface and then painted with a stencil
You were going
brush.
for I think a
When the tape
Mass
was
Effect
removed, there was a cool
kind of
little,
color scheme.
albeit sloppy, decal on the part. That same blue paint was added in stripes to
It's good
different
blue.
parts of
I
the
like that
sculpt
blue.
and gun body to break up some of those flat surfaces. I also made another stencil, this time on my vinyl cutter, to add a
Film
serial
Riot.
number to the gun.
Yeah.
It's kind of vague, but
Film Riot and then Punish Props on the right. The middle is the date that Proximity was released.
the ankle cuff video.
tell me
Yeah.
if you can figure out what the number represents.
So it'll be December 5th, 2013. 2013. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Additional
Time's
parts of the
weird,
gun, like the
folks.
beveled rails and the grips, were all painted by hand to add some more contrast to an otherwise white body. To dirty things up a bit, I went with some watered down black and brown acrylic paints. The paint was brushed onto all of the recessed details and then mostly wiped away, leaving some grime down in the grooves. This little bit of grime adds some contrast and realism to the paint job.
This part here, I'm thinking I was inspired by the District 9 gun.
Yeah, the big
The
bevel.
little panel with yeah.
After that, I grabbed some silver acrylic paint and did a little bit of dry brushing on some of the darker parts of the gun to weather them and
There we
add
go.
even more
That's a
contrast.
good, nice, subtle.
And then the
amount
very
of
last bit
dry
of detail
brushing.
was a laser cut piece of
Wham.
acrylic plastic for the
Guys,
scope.
I
It
forgot
was
that's
glued
what
into
that
place
said.
with a little bit of super.
An ongoing joke on Film Riot is they yell "Bammy Wham" just as a general exclamation. So I'm glad I was able to include that little Easter egg.
Glue, and I could call this giant space gun finished.
Tell you what, that was a
Yes.
really fun build. I really enjoyed being able to design something myself and trying to figure out how everything was supposed to go together. Now, I didn't film it, but I did also build a foam briefcase.
I actually love the briefcase just as much as the gun.
It was made out of floor mats. I mostly used my table saw to cut out all of the rectangular parts. And then, of course, glued it all together, gave it a hinge so the whole thing could open and close, and then I used some upholstery foam to contain all of the space gun parts. Thanks so much for following along on the build today. Of course, if you haven't checked them out already, you owe it to yourself to go
Yay.
check out our Foamsmith books.
Hey!
Especially Foamsmith
You can tell I'm filming this myself because I'm jealous. He's afraid.
2. If you're interested in making more weapons out of EVA foam, this is the book for you. It details this gun here on the cover, plus a big old fantasy axe on the back.
The way I did this gun is very much the same way I did the gun for Foamsmith 2, the Jade Rabbit, like PVC pipe and bending and all that. It's like almost one-to-one from that book.
Of course, all that stuff is over at punishprops.com. If you have any questions about this build, leave those in the comments. I'll try my best to get back to you. And if you're interested in any of the tools or materials that I use on this project, those will be linked down in the description.
All
Of
right.
course, if you haven't already, go watch the film that Ryan and the team put together. Those guys are
What's it called, Bill? What's it called? I don't remember.
fantastic. Head on over to their channel, give them a subscription. If you're interested in DIY filmmaking, they are the #1 channel.
Yeah, I bet
for
you
that.
linked it in
That's
this
all I have
video.
for you today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next build.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel,
all
please
right.
subscribe so you don't.
Hold on, real
Great.
quick. I want to show you guys it in action. Film Riot.
This was part of a kind of a series of videos they did that were kind of in the same world. So Proximity was the first, and then there's this one, and then there's a third one. I think they've done 3, and they were all kind of like relating to the same kind of alien technology stuff. Like, yeah, SENTiNEL?
SENTiNEL, there it is. Oh, we know it's cool because it's widescreen. I want to show how they added all like the sound effects and everything.
Yeah.
We'll just do it in window. Yeah, there's the case. Yeah, so they add the Foley audio and it sells it. Like you would never believe it. I will say it's very lightweight and it might have made sense to make it heavier. So it looked like it was heavier in his arms.
That
but
was the, I think the comment about the gun in their video
Yeah.
was that when he's running with it, it looks too light.
Right.
So it's like we made like the stunt version. We didn't make like the hero heavy version because he like literally had to sprint across the field with it. But
you add the audio.
yeah,
And it does sell it a lot. Yeah.
that's so cool. Oh,
They
I don't
they add
like
CG to light up those
Oh.
lines. What? This guy's little thing.
That's great.
Like the silhouette. All right, you guys can see see what happens in the final thing. You'll have to go watch it yourself though. But it's called SENTiNEL by Film Riot. Thanks so much for hanging out with this blast from the past, you guys. This was really fun. If you haven't, obviously go check out Film Riot. They're just the best, and they're the nicest, most awesome people.
Yeah, we'll link their 1,000th video down below because they do like a compilation
Yes.
of a lot of funny moments over
yeah,
the years,
yeah.
and it's super cute.
That'll wrap it up for us. Thanks again, you guys, for all the support. We really couldn't do this without you. Keep that up, and we'll see you guys next week for some shenanigans from the basement.
I think we're gonna have a Mace video for you next week. I
Yeah,
think we're gonna do
we're
it.
very excited. The mace is all done, and we're
we're all moved out.
Yep.
We're at home now. We have a cat
Right
right
here.
there,
Hey,
and
buddy.
everything's great.
We're excited to keep making some fun videos, making really cool stuff. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.